So Chery has been with WSDA's nutrient management program since 2012. She's the dairy nutrient inspector for Southwest Washington with a little over 70 dairies in her region, and serves as a technical and compliance specialist and lead inspector for the program. So Chery's quite knowledgeable about the rules and regulations and is going to go over all those pieces for you. Feel free to ask her questions as she goes along, or hold them to the end of her talk as your choice. Thanks, Chery. Yeah.
All right, can everyone hear me? Am I loud enough? Yes, all right. So rules and regulations. Probably not going to be the most fun topic of the day, but pretty essential because the rules and regulations apply to every single dairy, every single licensed dairy in Washington State. So we're just going to jump right in. Let's see if I can make the clicker work.
Turn it on the side.
There we go. So where to start? We're going to start with the Federal Clean Water Act, which is implemented by the Environmental Protection Agency. That Federal Clean Water Act was actually written in 1948, changed significantly in 1972-ish to make it illegal to discharge pollutants to navigable waters without a National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, an NPDES permit. Now, EPA delegated its authority for the Federal Clean Water Act to the Department of Ecology, who then wrote the State Water Pollution Control Act, or RCW 9048. RCW stands for Revised Code of Washington, who then wrote the Dairy Nutrient Management Act in 1998. So all of these things, you're seeing a link here that goes back to the Federal Clean Water Act. The Department of Ecology implemented the Dairy Nutrient Management Act until 2003, when it was then delegated to the Washington State Department of Agriculture. That Dairy Nutrient Management Act came to the Department of Agriculture along with a memorandum of understanding that helped guide how we implement the Dairy Nutrient Management Act. The Dairy Nutrient Management Act, among other things, is housed within the Department of Agriculture within the Dairy Nutrient Management Program. And I'm the Dairy Nutrient Management Program. In this particular case, I'm one of 6 people in that program. The Dairy Nutrient Management Program helps implement or helps guide how dairies implement their dairy nutrient management plans. And the Dairy Nutrient Management Plan, as Nicole just talked about, is also influenced by rules, not just the laws, but the rules such as the Dairy Nutrient Management rule that implements the record-keeping rules. That was in 2012, and it defines the penalty matrices for discharges and record-keeping violations. The plans are approved and certified by conservation districts. They may also be written by conservation districts. They may be written by consultants or technical service providers. They are also influenced by local ordinances, by the National Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. They're influenced by the Dairy Nutrient Management Act. These plans house a lot of influence from laws, rules, state, local, and then where are the dairies? This big cluster represents kind of a family that all have some influence over the dairy nutrient management plans and the dairies. Now, there is a simplified version, and I didn't really want to start with this particular version because I recognize that the relationships are pretty darn complex between the federal, the state, the local, and the dairies. Really what I'm going to focus on today is just this relationship between Department of Agriculture and the Dairy Nutrient Management Act and the dairies. So we're going to start with what the Dairy Nutrient Management Act requires of the dairies. Just a few things. Thou shalt register. Once you get your license, you have 6 months to register with the Dairy Nutrient Management Program, or Department of Agriculture. That includes general information about contacts, where you are, what your email is if you have it, phone numbers, etc., animal numbers. Are you a composter? Do you export to help make your nutrients balance on farm? you have to develop a nutrient management plan. We talked a little bit about all the different influences of that nutrient management plan. 6 months after you get your license, thou shalt give us a nutrient management plan that is approved by the Conservation District Board. It can be written by a technical service provider or the Conservation District, but it has to be approved by the board. And 18 months after that, it has to be certified by the board. Now, once you are approved and certified, you're in compliance with that portion of the Dairy Nutrient Management Act. You have to maintain records. 5 years worth of records must be maintained, and I'll talk a lot more about the specific records that must be maintained. And you must prevent discharges to waters of the state. So that's what the Dairy Nutrient Management Act requires of all dairies. The Nutrient Management Act also has some requirements for the program. We have to perform inspections within 6 months of having a license. We should be out at your farm inspecting your facility for an initial inspection looking at management of dairy nutrients. And every 18 to 22 months after that, we'll show up at your farm for a routine inspection. We are obligated to conduct investigations and follow a very specific compliance pathway if a discharge or record-keeping violations are suspected. We are required to maintain a database. That database houses essentially all of the different interactions that we have with the dairies, the routine inspections, the investigations, etc., the registration information that comes in. That's housed in that database, and we're required to maintain a penalty grant account. So if the compliance path takes us down to a penalty, all the penalties that are paid to the Department of Agriculture go into this account, and the monies in that account are used for education and outreach and research. Part of the monies that we acquire in that account help pay for this program today. So inspections. If you're a dairy and you've been in business for more than 6 months, you've seen one of the inspectors at your facilities. And what are we looking for? We're looking at facility condition. Very specifically, collection, conveyance, how do you get your manure from the back of the cow to storage? And are you managing to keep it out of waters of the state? Are your gutters up? Are your curbs in good shape, and are they in place? We want to look at your lagoons. We want to be able to walk all the way around the tip top of your lagoon if possible, because that helps us evaluate the structural integrity of that lagoon. Are you in danger of having that integrity compromised because of rodent access, something like that? We need to be able to see that. How is the capacity in that lagoon? Are solids building up and compromising your ability to realize your full storage that was initially addressed in your dairy nutrient management plan? We want to look at fields, filter strips. Are the filter strips doing their job? Are you adhering to the buffers that are recommended in your plan? All of those things help us evaluate whether you're going down the right path to help contain nutrients and manage them appropriately. And then lastly, we look at record keeping. And record keeping can quite often represent the majority of time that we spend on your farm, because it's the record keeping that gives us a look at how you are managing those nutrients agronomically. Now we can see if manure is running off the hill and going into water. We can't see if manure and the nitrates from that manure is leaching down through your soil. The records are what give us a peek at that piece of your management. So very specifically, and I guess specifically, everybody's a little bit different. The inspectors, there are 4 of us. There are actually 3.5 of us. I'm the half because I have the fewest number of dairies in my region. I always, when I'm looking at records, I start with the soil analysis. This particular piece of information will give me the first look at whether or not you're managing your nutrients in an agronomic manner. So I don't know if you guys can see this or not. Maybe I even have a pointer on this. Probably. Woo, there it is. So when I look at this record and I see 4 parts per million of nitrate, and I look at the previous records and they are all hovering around 4, 12 parts per million nitrates for the last 4 years on this particular field, I'm not going to probably spend a whole lot of time trying to calculate whether you've applied nutrients agronomically. I might suggest that you could perhaps use more nutrients on that piece of ground, but I'm not too concerned about over-application. So right off the bat, my radar kind of goes down. And that's what I use these records for. So I start with the soil analysis. You are required to have a post-harvest soil nitrate test annually. Most facilities that I've come across, they do the whole suite, but the whole suite is required every 3 years, all of the soil test records. Nutrient analysis is pretty essential, and this is one of the ones that I see the biggest gap in. We go to facilities and they're missing their nutrient analysis records. If you are struggling with nutrient management and agronomic application, how can you determine whether you're making the appropriate application if you don't know how much nutrients are contained in the manure that you're applying? How can you meet your crop needs if you don't know what you're putting on your soil? So nutrient analysis is key. The requirement is for nitrate, phosphorus, and potassium, I believe, every year. At some point, hydrometers were handed out. And Nicole, I don't know if they were handed out up here in Whatcom County or not. A long time ago, they were. So I still see a lot of them in Lewis County. So that's one of my regions, is Lewis County. And those hydrometers, I think, are not very valuable. I'll just go ahead and say it. I don't think they work really well. It really depends on the solids in the manure as to what reading you're going to get. So they sometimes work. If you're going to use your hydrometer to do your nutrient analysis, make sure you're doing kind of a double comparison, a duplicate. Test your manure with your hydrometer if you still are using it, and then split that sample and send it to the lab so you can compare the results between a lab test and a hydrometer test. And that'll give you a better idea if you're insisting on using your hydrometer. But we really want to see that a lab analysis. Application records, these are just a little bit complicated. Here's the requirements. Everything that you see up here are actually in rule, that WAC 16611. And you'll see these handouts in the back. These are record-keeping requirements that we wrote up a fact sheet right after our rule was finalized in 2012. Field, year of application, total nitrogen and phosphorus applied each year to every single field, the crop in each field, and the application, where that application occurred, crop nutrient need based on expected yield, nutrient sources from residual nitrogen, and nitrogen from organic matter in the soil, date, method, nutrient source, is it solids, is it liquids, is it commercial fertilizer, weather conditions 24 hours prior to the time of application and at the time of application. All of these records are required for application records. What I really want is to know where you applied the nutrients, when you applied those nutrients, what you applied, whether it was a liquid or a solid or a commercial, how much manure you applied, and if you're having issues, which would be identified by your soil test, what your crop was on that field, so we can look at crop uptake, and what the weather was. I don't have any forms to hand out for you because I see all manner of different records. Some people keep them on a calendar, and that's great. That solves one of the when questions for you. Put those numbers down on a calendar. Mark your field numbers. If you use a different field number system than what's written on your field plan and your dairy nutrient management plan, make that really clear when we're doing the inspection to help us. Everybody has nicknames for their fields. And quite often they're different than what we see in the plans. So help us understand where that manure is going. So where, when, what, how much, and what the weather's doing. The weather is a big deal because it's your insurance policy, sort of. When you look at the weather 24 hours prior to your application and you look at your field condition, it's not saturated, and you look at the weather 3 days of forecast, 3 days out, and it looks like it's going to be good weather, make sure you're capturing that information. Whether you're using the ARM program, which Nicole will probably talk about a little bit more, or whether you're taking a snapshot on your phone of that weather forecast. If you have that information and then we get called out because there's been a complaint, You can say, look, I have all of this information. I made the best decision possible with the information at hand. And that's really good for us. And it's good for you too. So make sure you capture that weather information. All right, manure transfer. We want to know about manure transfer records also because that's part of your nutrient balance. If we have the conservation district or another planner come in to look at, maybe we think something's going on with the nutrient balance, you have too much or not enough, they want to know where those nutrients are going. So keep track of any manure transfer, whether it's coming or going. Irrigation, this is the last one of those records that's required. And really, for the most part, on the west side of the mountains, irrigation records, not so important. If I don't see a single irrigation record on any farm on the west side, I'm not going to get my knickers in a twist about it because you really don't do too much irrigating over here. All right, that's it for record keeping. Again, all of the records that we just reviewed, all those record keeping requirements that we just reviewed are on this fact sheet. And record keeping is one of the violations. There are only 2 violations that can occur on dairies through the Nutrient Management Act. It's lack of record keeping and it's discharge. Those are the only 2 violations. So I want to talk about this topic. Nicole asked me to bring this up because it's kind of a hot topic right now. Third-party manure application. And one of the things to say about this particular issue is that if the applicator is working on behalf of the dairy, then the dairy is responsible. So if the applicator is an agent of the dairy, then the dairy is responsible for that application, whether it's occurring on dairy nutrient, on land under a dairy nutrient management plan, or whether it's occurring on a blueberry field. If they're acting on behalf of the dairy, then the dairy is responsible. So that's something really to keep in mind about custom pumpers or third-party manure applications. Now I'm getting ready, I'm bracing myself for some grumbling here. Governor requested legislation. Has anybody heard about this yet? The manure certification? A couple people have heard about it. I see some nods. I see a couple people shaking their heads. Right now, there is proposed legislation that would require all manure applicators applying manure to more than 20 acres to be certified. So similar to the Department of Agriculture's pesticide certification program, you would have to go through some certain number of hours of class to receive your certification, and then you would have to apply manure to fields that had a manure application plan. Right now, the proposed legislation wouldn't even start with the certification program until 2017, so it's a little ways down the road. The language currently says that this would only take place in 3 counties. It does not specify which 3 counties, but can anyone guess what 3 counties might be? I'm guessing it's going to be Whatcom, Skagit, and Yakima. So the details of this legislation, and it's written in the draft language, would be ironed out in rule. So even though this seems perhaps like there hasn't been a lot of conversation about it with the primary stakeholders, there is still a lot of opportunity to comment on this proposed legislation. The Z draft language is available, and if anybody wants it, let me know, and I will send it to you. I'll email it to you. It hasn't been heard in any sessions yet. It's not gone through hearings yet. If you have a comment about this legislation, I've been asked to direct you to my boss, which is Ginny Prest. So send Ginny Prest an email, give her a call with your comments on this proposed legislation. She's actually gathering all of the comments for the entire state. So Department of Agriculture, Department of Ecology, Department of Health, and the Conservation Commission worked together to write the proposed legislation. This wasn't written in a total vacuum. So that's it about third-party applications and the proposed manure application certification legislation. I want to talk a little bit about investigations. This guy right here, where's my little pointer again? This is Curry Fleggy, and I realize it's probably not a great picture of him, but he's the newest addition to our program. And when you see him out pulling water samples, he's not necessarily doing an investigation. He was actually hired into our program through a National Estuary Program grant to do some short-term water quality monitoring in conjunction with some of the pollution identification and control programs, or the PIC programs, in a couple of different regions. So there's a PIC program in Whatcom County, there's one in Skagit County, and there's one in Snohomish County. So he's doing some short-term water quality monitoring. So that's what he's doing up there. We do investigations, and he does some too. And when we do them, we communicate with the dairy producer. If there's been a complaint against you, we're going to call you, and we're going to tell you what the complaint's about, and we're going to show up at your property and hopefully meet with you to collect water samples, take pictures. We want to work with you to figure out if there has been a discharge, and if there has been, what is the source of that discharge. And then our field inspectors will write a recommendation for enforcement. That recommendation for enforcement comes to Olympia. Yay, I get all the recommendations for enforcement. And once we get them, we may or may not, in fact, continue on down that compliance pathway. It just depends on what evidence there is. Has there been a discharge or not? So investigations. And speaking of compliance, here's the path. We provide regulatory technical assistance. And what that means is that if we walk onto your dairy and we see an issue that we think you can easily change to meet the requirements of the laws and rules that apply to your dairy, then we're going to make a recommendation on how you can meet those requirements. And sometimes that'll be a conversation, sometimes that'll show up in your inspection report or an outcome letter. If you haven't made changes, then a warning letter may follow. If the warning letter is not effective at achieving the desired results, then a notice of correction will follow. A notice of correction is kind of scary looking. It's pretty darn official, but it's still considered informal enforcement. We can still only make recommendations for addressing the issue in that notice of correction. We also have an immediate order action as a tool in our regulatory toolbox. In that immediate order action, we can actually say, thou shalt stop doing X, whatever it is, to come into compliance with the rules and regulations. We also have notice of penalty, obviously. That's the last step in our compliance pathway. Most dairies, if there is a problem, they go to this level. The notice of correction is usually far sufficient. By that point, we've had dairies, planners, conservation districts, we've had the whole family involved to help make sure that changes happen here. So we don't have very many facilities that get to this notice of penalty. And I think one in the last 7-10 years have had an immediate action order. So that's the compliance pathway. I want to end with this. In addition to the Dairy Nutrient Management Act, that law, the Dairy Nutrient Management Program is really guided by their mission. And the mission is obviously to protect water quality, but it's also to help maintain a healthy agricultural business environment, very specifically, to help maintain a healthy business agricultural environment. And we do this with clear guidance, education, technical assistance. We do this with equitable enforcement of the laws and regulations. And we also do this with clear communication between our sister agencies, our stakeholders, and the dairy industry. And it's all of these things that help us implement the rules and regulations that apply to all of the dairies. Are there any questions? I didn't think there would be a whole lot of questions, but feel free. If you find something that is burning in the back of your head later, come find me and ask me a question. Send me an email, communicate with me somehow, and I'll try to help you out as best I can. Thank you.